Watching CUTV.
Okay.
Alright, white balance? Okay. Alright, good evening. My name is Diego Duran. Welcome to Racing Time. Tonight we have a very esteemed guest here joining us at Colgate University. We have Mr. Edward James Olmos. And tonight I have the pleasure of interviewing Mr. Olmos and asking him a couple of questions. So let's start. We're a little pressed on time. So, Mr. Olmos, first of all, thank you very much for being here, and welcome to Colgate University and to CUTV and to Racing Time. So we're just going to start with some questions here. And,
I got one question.
sure.
Okay, here we are at CUTV.
Yes, sir.
We just finished having dinner.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Why did you guys eat so much? I mean, come
All right.
on. I mean,
Okay.
2 orders of every single hors d'oeuvre?
It's a fair question.
It's a fair
question.
Fair.
I think I'll answer that with 2 words. You know, Colgate tab. You know, that Colgate was paying for it. You know, we pay $32,000 to be at this institution, and we made every single penny back tonight. Tonight, folks, right here, Colgate Inn.
Every single kind of dessert.
Everything.
Plus ice cream on the side.
Yep.
It was very socialistic, too.
It was a whole, yeah. Let's
Tell
tell them
me.
about that. Folks, capitalism, you know what we did? We took all the desserts and put them on the center. So all of us, they were multicultural desserts. They weren't just brown desserts. They were every kind of dessert. And people could just feel free to reach in when they felt comfortable.
But you couldn't cross.
You couldn't cross though. You had to stay kind of in your own angle.
Yeah, you had to stay with it. Whatever 2 desserts were in front of you. Then there would be a switch.
Right,
after
there would be
4
a
bites.
systematic timed switch, which I thought was a great idea.
Very
So,
good. Very well thought out.
The evening has just started out great, and it's been a pleasure already.
Too much food.
Too much food. So, why don't we, I don't know, you know, this is very kind of informal. We've had a great time. Thank you especially to Alex for making this possible. Now, Mr. Olmos, you've heard a little bit about what Colgate is like over dinner. We've told you a little bit about the numbers, a little bit about our situation here. Obviously, you know, where Colgate is situated plays a part in what we can do as Latino students and as, you know, trying to bring about positive change. But in your opinion, and from what you know so far, which is kind of limited, how do you think that Latinos can effectively bring about change in a school like Colgate, in an institution like Colgate?
Well, the introduction of culture into any school is really worthwhile understanding because basically it's sad, but culture is not an aspect of our basic requirements. There's no, it's real strong diving into the cultural dynamic of all of the different countries that are represented in this United States. Over the last 400 years, 500 years, people have been coming from all over the world to live here and set up their families, and through generations have now become what we call U.S. citizens and
Right.
U.S. Americans. But we have never had a strong sense of understanding the cultural dynamic. We have a little bit that is done to us, say in the 7th grade or 8th grade, when we get into studying a little bit about Latin America, and I think maybe that takes 1 or 2 classes
Right.
worth of time. So you maybe get 2 hours, 4 hours of
Right.
in world geography in the 10th grade. You might get a couple more hours, but in essence, you really don't get a solid understanding of the dynamics, say, of the African cultures that are here, and the Latino cultures that are here, the Asian cultures, the indigenous cultures that have been here for tens of thousands of years. We don't really get those real strong. We get a strong European base
Right.
history, and therefore, so when you go into here at Colgate or any college, you have an opportunity to have a little bit more diversity as far as culturalness is concerned, but you have to take the classes.
Right. And ask the questions.
Yes, well, you have to take the classes, and usually, who's going to take a Latin American Studies course if you don't have to?
Right.
There's no prerequisites that give us the basis for cultural awareness in in this country.
Yeah.
So basically, I think that, lawyers will be lawyers, and if they happen to be Latino lawyers, then they might even take a Latino studies course,
Right.
But most likely they won't. They'll
Yeah.
stay into the legal aspect and take the prerequisites, and then take everything they need to get inside of it.
Just enough to.
Yes, to get inside of
Yeah.
it. But unless you have a strong desire of knowing your heritage, you're not going to even deal in it. And then you get to the point of where you're asking me, what can Latino students do, say at a school like Colgate, when they number less than 2% of the
Yes.
population, to make and bring an awareness to the populace. All I can say is that, honestly, I would bring the arts in. I would bring them in strongly. I would try to, arts have the different disciplines have a tendency to really supersede all cultural boundaries. So a person like Carlos Santana,
Right.
who is one of the giant, musicians of all time, would be, to hear his music being played here on the campus would lend itself a little bit to exposing people to that. Bringing in speakers like myself, and if the people will come, I don't know if they'll come though. It'll be quite interesting to
That's
see
the
who
thing.
comes tonight.
Right.
We're here, and we'll see how many people actually show up.
Right.
My instincts are that if we have jam capacity, I would be surprised. I must say that if you bring in films, if you bring in speakers, if you bring in dancers, if you bring in music, Dr. Loco and what we were talking about earlier,
Right.
some of the guys that are around that you could bring in, that it would take time, but it would eventually become, something where people would start to catch on to it.
Okay. And kind of playing off of that, do you think that Colgate University has a responsibility to its Latino students? And what I mean by that is, we kind of always approach the question, and I think we approach the answer as it being student initiated or student driven. Bringing the speakers like yourself, bringing the arts to Colgate. It's students dictate what they want. Do you think that it's always kind of student driven, or should Colgate University also take a look at some of its policies, at its hiring policies, at its makeup of faculty? How many Latino faculty do we have? I mean, at what point do we also ask a kind of recognition and the same kind of exposure from Colgate University at the administrative level?
Well, that again goes back to do you want to have culturalness inside of the structure?
Right.
No one even thinks about it. It's not even an issue. It's becoming one because there's basically so much, the cultural aspect of the country is the strongest aspect of the country.
Right. It's a strength.
Yeah, it's the strongest one we have.
Right.
It's stronger than our political might or our economical might or anything else. When you get into understanding the cultural dynamic of the planet, and it's all represented here in the United States of America by U.S. citizens, you really start to say, wow, I guess this is really, it does work.
Right.
The planet can live together. Because we are living here together. As much as some people think that it's not very successful, it's been very successful. The majority of the people here are very, very happy, and that's really the issue: is how much happiness can a country sustain and have by its people. And yes, there's a lot of tragedy here, and there's a lot of violence, and there's a lot of things that make it very difficult. We have problems, but in essence, we are very, very tolerant and very, very understanding of our future. Now, for Colgate to have, say, Asian American instructors, professors,
Right.
not teaching Asian American studies,
No,
just
teaching all disciplines.
just
Right.
teaching,
Right.
and to have indigenous going out to, look for indigenous teachers to come and be just part of the staff, so that there's that exposure,
Right.
that mentality, that value system being brought into, say, philosophy or psychology
In all
or
fields.
engineering,
Yeah.
or medicine, whatever we learn here in liberal arts schools. But that is not the issue.
Mhm.
I mean, that is the issue. That is not the policy of almost any school in America.
Right.
And if Colgate could come upon itself to really start to think that way, I think it would be one of the first, it would be a very, very strong understanding that would probably serve as a role model
Mhm.
for the rest of the schools if they could really, really, really look into that. Now, what does that do for existing professors that are here? Do you get rid of some so you can start this process? No. Just in your hiring, whenever you go out to hire the next person, you look for an indigenous person.
Right.
You look for an Asian person.
You also, I think you also publish in
Yeah, of course.
certain
You
areas,
put out,
publish
you
in
put,
certain
sure, you
articles,
put out
yeah.
articles and stuff, but basically you have that consciousness, and that's what you're asking me.
Right.
Should they have that consciousness? Of course they should. Do they? No, they don't.
Okay.
They being the administration of almost all the schools in America,
Right.
as you can tell by means of who it is that is actually the chancellors, who are the presidents, how many presidents and chancellors of cultural dynamic do we have, of different cultures do we have in the country,
Mhm.
you know? And that's where you start to realize what the needs are.
Okay. Thank you.
Good question, too.
Thank you. Now I kind of want to move down the spectrum of questions here, and I want to specifically ask you about Latina women, because I think that oftentimes when we talk about Latino issues, they can sometimes, not always, but sometimes kind of be, male-driven, or we always kind of tend to assume that change will come from, male Latino leaders in our society. And so I kind of want to avoid that in this interview. So I wanted to ask you, what role do you think that Latina women specifically can play in kind of reaffirming our Latino presence here on campus and in the U.S.?
Well, I don't say this to be funny.
Mhm.
I don't say this to be cute.
Okay.
I think that God is a woman. That's my belief, and I think that a lot of people are going to be very, very surprised when they do get to their nirvana, their heaven, whatever they want to call it, because they're going to find out that Jesus is not blonde hair, blue-eyed, and they're going to find out that he's a Jew. Born a Jew, lived a Jew, died a Jew. So they'll get up to there'll be a Jew at the gate saying, "Meet God, my mother." And that would be people would freak out. But I think that women have the deciding factor on the balance of the planet. Women, Latino women, any women, just talking women in general,
Sure.
it's so off balance right now. The balance between the genders is so off
Yeah.
that it creates a lot of the problems that we are
A
faced
lot of
with today.
tension.
Well, the problems we're faced with today, the biggest one being the equality.
Mhm.
We talk about equality, we talk about human rights in this country, and yet the woman does not have an equal stake or share inside of the structure here. If it were true that they did, there would be women vice presidents and presidents of the United States. There would be,
Be equal pay.
everything
both
would be the
sexes.
same.
Yes.
Everything would be the same. And there would be no difference between the gender,
Right.
but there's a big difference. So Latinas being what part do they play in the advancement of the culture is total. They play as equal a part as the male, but since they don't have an equal say inside of the structure, it's off balance.
Okay.
And therefore we have some of the most dramatic problems that we've had, thousands of years ago. The human existence was based on a maternal aspect,
Mhm.
and then it became paternal, and then under the paternal understanding, the male understanding, it's become a lot more intense,
Yeah.
and now it is out of control.
Right.
The male has totally dominated to the point where the female really has a very difficult time in bringing equality to the house, to the society, to their spiritual awakenings. Bless the Unity Church for allowing women to be ordained as priests. That's like sacrilegious of Catholics.
Right.
And yet many women are more devout and actually can administer a stronger sense of compassion, passion, commitment, discipline
Honesty.
than men.
Mhm.
And so I just, that doesn't have anything to do, they say, the church says, to the facts of whether women, it's written in some aspect of the church's philosophy that derives from the teachings of Christ. Now you tell me where it says that Christ said that only men shall inherit the world, and being, the keepers of our spiritual center. Because I think that's really where our balance has been a little bit off.
Okay, thank you. Now, this is I think a very pertinent question, especially to Latino students overall, I think, here at Colgate that have to leave home for the first time, have to come to a place like Colgate University. It's a little isolated. But I think especially for Latino students, sometimes leaving home can be very, very difficult. And it can be very difficult for, I think, that reasons that are slightly different than for a student that is not Latino. Say, stronger family ties, or I don't know. I kind of want to get your opinion on that, but let me ask the question that I have written down. Do you think that there's a fundamental generational gap between first and second generation Latinos, which I would say are our parents and grandparents, and third and fourth generation Latinos, which are students our age and younger? And if so, how can we bring these two generations closer together?
I think age has a tendency to give generational gaps, whether it be Latino or not.
Sure.
Whenever you get into the perspectives of looking at through the eyes of a different cultural dynamic, then it all depends on the strengths of the culture and how far those values and morals have traveled into the next generations. How do we get it together? Because yes, they are split. How do they get it together? I think it gets back into fundamental understanding of culture, and the fundamental understanding of family. Now, how dysfunctional is a certain family,
right,
whether it be Latino or not?
Right.
How dysfunctional is it? It will tell you how strong and how much they can handle. Of course, the ones that have a basis of physical and spiritual and they bond together by way of their sense of who they are as a family. The brothers and sisters like each other, the mother and father and siblings, everyone likes each other. The grandparents are brought into the mix. Whenever you have wisdom, that's when it becomes the strongest. That's the strongest family, and it's whenever the elders are kept inside of the structure,
okay,
and not put out of the structure.
The tradition is kept and encouraged.
Yeah, I mean, history is passed on.
Right. Right.
People know
okay,
who the father and the mother were of your grandparents.
Right.
Once you know your great-grandparents, if you didn't know them personally, but when you learn of them, it makes you a stronger human being.
Right.
And so if they tell you about their great-grandparents, their great-grandparents, and their grandparents, those are your great-great-great-grandparents.
Kind of, you can't know where you're going until you know where you've been. Kind of idea.
It does work that way.
Okay. All right. Here we go. Now, let's talk a little bit about the terms Latino and Hispanic. Now, I'll just read off my question because I think I wrote it pretty well, actually. Here we go. So while the term Latino Hispanic is meant to be all-inclusive, particularly here in the U.S., we often see that there are fundamental ideological and social differences between groups. For example, animosity between Central and South Americans. How do you think that this will affect our efforts to bring about change in America?
Well, anytime there's discord, it's kind of hard to bring about a sense of accord. And therefore, if the leaders are in different, if they can't get along, then how are they going to bring a unification of the mass? So if the Central Americans and the South Americans, if the, say, Puerto Ricans and the Dominicans or Cubans can't really relate, then that group will not be able to pull a strong sense of balance to the majority in the whole. Now, basically, Latinos constitute the majority of the people in the Western Hemisphere. And one thing that does unite us is the fact that we are Latino. Hispanic doesn't unite as much because there are many people that do not come from the Spanish origin. So they are not inside of the Spanish dominance.
Yeah.
they may speak the Spanish language, but they're not of Spanish roots. So, but Latino, which encompasses French and Italian as well, is much more encompassing for the people as a whole. I use Latino rather than Hispanic because there's too many non-Spanish origin people in Latin America.
Right.
So Latino then is much more encompassing. So to bring those two things together, I think Hispanic was really brought about by the U.S. government.
Who's the census?
Yeah, I think back a few, when they started using his, meaning his history, and panic, meaning Spanish.
Hispanic.
So, basically I would say that if I was to embody a word that would capture all the different cultures that represent the Latino culture and the Hispanic culture, I would call them human beings, human race.
There we go. There we go. All right. Now, let's move on to something that I think, at least myself, and I think some of the viewers can probably identify with, and that was your movie Stand and Deliver, which probably created a lot of teachers in America.
It's a blessing.
Yes, it definitely was. Now, in your film Stand and Deliver, you portray Jaime Escalante, a dedicated math teacher who helps his students overcome incredible odds. What role do you think education, and then kind of in brackets, higher education, can play in helping Latinos overcome current hardships and succeed in America?
The involvement of the human mind is the key. Education on the streets, education in your home, education in institutions like schools, universities, education spiritually by way of could be doctrines, or it could be just beliefs, values, moral values that are given to you, and then you stand them up further. Those are all essence of living. You must, the aesthetic of living is to really try to bring about a sense of happiness. And in that, how do you do that is by having knowledge. Knowledge is the key. So, yeah, do I think that higher education is necessary? On all levels.
Fundamental.
All levels.
Basic.
Street to institutions to home, everything. Right. On all levels. But especially if you can get the discipline to get your bachelor's and your master's, then your PhD, then you're showing to the society as a whole your sense of discipline.
Right.
It's like joining the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
You show something when you join the Marine Corps. There's a difference between the different facets of military, and you know it by the boot camp, and so the discipline that you get into. So the same thing goes here. The master degree is more of a challenge than the bachelor, but doesn't compare to what you have to do for a PhD.
That's right.
So
That's right.
At the same way, to have achieved, as high as you can go.
Right.
That's the key, is to evolve as much as you can in this lifetime. I think you take two things with you when you leave. If there's anything that you go into, you take the love that you've shared with others and the knowledge that you've obtained. So it's good to have a good bank of knowledge with you.
More to share.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Now, this is racing time, so we have to kind of hit you hard a little bit and make it a little controversial. So, I don't know if this is controversial, but here we go. Let's go for it. What role, both in Colgate and in the United States, should we expect white society to play in reaffirming ourselves as Latinos in the U.S.? What is white America's responsibility?
Well, I think that all of our responsibilities are to try to understand the beauty of culture. So, since right now the dominant understanding in school systems from first grade all the way up to any form of education is predominant European American, I think that that structure, European Americanish, the Caucasian should really start to get into advancing themselves and broadening their scope by allowing other cultural dynamics that have made this country what it is today to come in. In other words, somewhere along the line, we will have ability to have more than just, one person of color as a national hero. Right now, we have is Martin Luther King, and people say, "Well, wait a minute. We have lots of, we got Michael Jordan, we've had, Jackie Robinson, we've had, Jim Thorpe, we've had great, Maya Lin, great Asians, Hayakawa, beautiful people that have contributed, indigenous people, Asian, Latino, Cesar Chavez,
Yeah.
But I say to that is that they're not put into the perspective of being national heroes. Then everybody say, well, define hero. Okay, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson, the Wright brothers, the Lindberghs, Adams, John and Quincy, these are people who we've studied 3, 4, 5 times throughout our system over a 12-year period from 1 through 12. We don't study, other than Martin Luther King, which is just recent, do we have him inside of the structure so that we study their participation.
Yeah.
We have no Asians, we have no indigenous. Geronimo is not considered to be the father of this country, and yet he is. He's more father to this country than Abraham Lincoln or George Washington. George Washington learned from the onslaught of understanding of the indigenous people. He learned to survive in this region of the world. And from the things that he brought, which were an asset to the communities, but the things that he learned here to survive in this environment, the people who taught him to survive should be given credit for that teaching.
Right.
And they should be taught as heroes.
And they should be represented in the
Yes,
classrooms.
somewhere.
Yeah.
Somewhere.
Okay.
And so the European American or the Caucasian or the white America should be really propagating a strong understanding of cultural beauty. And we don't do that. And we have yet to do it in the year's 2000. And you're going to feel the pangs of that, sure enough. It's starting to play itself through. You see what's happening with our children. Our children are coming out into the school systems, and most of it is discriminatory and prejudicial behavior that is driving the violence. So I don't know how long we have to keep on feeling this before we start to do something about it, because like anything else, violence is a disease, like cancer, like AIDS, like tuberculosis, polio. When polio was rampant, no one in their right mind wanted to get polio. But we immediately got into the fact of trying to cut polio at the quick. In other words, eradicate it.
Right.
Find something that'll block polio from existing. And they did that. And to a certain extent, we've eradicated polio on the Western Hemisphere at least. Now, we can eradicate violence. People say, no, it's in human nature. No, it isn't. It's taught.
Behavior. It's taught
Yes.
behavior.
Yes. So children do not come out of their mother's wombs with pistols in their hands.
Yeah.
People do not come out of their mother's wombs wishing any kind of, ill will on something. All they come out is just, they don't know anything. They don't know how to breathe. They don't know how to eat. They don't know how to blink. They don't know how to do any of those things that we think are natural and basic.
Right.
No, we teach them how to breathe. We teach them how to blink. We teach them how to start the machine and get it going. If it wasn't for that, you would cut the baby's umbilical cord and that baby would die.
Right.
That's it. Maybe never breathing. Maybe the coldness would start it to take a gasp. But if it didn't, it's dead. Dies in the water. Cut it. That's it. It's not like the horse that tries to stand up as soon as it comes out and look for food. It's not like the kangaroo who crawls up the pen. Those are natural instincts. Those are what I call instinctive behavior. Now that we don't have that. Now people say, oh, wait a minute. There's just so much involved in this. Yes, it is. Very, very strong. But I will say that this is the truth. A truth. Okay. That violence is a learned behavior. Period.
Okay. All right. How are we doing on time?
Great. It's a great time. 5 minutes.
Okay. All right. So we're just going to ask 2 more questions. Now, Mr. Olmos, with the so-called recent Latin boom that America is experiencing, we have artists like Ricky Martin, we have artists like Jennifer Lopez, Enrique Iglesias to a certain extent. We've seen that suddenly it has become fashionable to accept and conform to certain Latino customs and ways. For example, learning.
Can I keep that book here?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Oh,
Go
yes,
ahead.
yes. It has become fashionable to, conform to certain Latino customs and ways, like learning how to dance salsa, eating certain foods. What's your opinion of the so-called Latin boom in America's response to Latino artists? Do you feel that this representation is accurate and/or positive for U.S. Latinos?
Well, I think any time that a cultural arts can move forward inside of the planet, it's excellent. The more I know about this Swedish, dances and the, Irish folk dances and the Spanish arts, the more I appreciate those people. Right now, the boom is timely because we do encompass being the largest groupings of people in the Western Hemisphere. Latins happen to dominate the hemisphere. They are dominating the North America as we speak. We are now well over 40 million, even though our own experts will say that we're at 31, 32 million. That's only because there really is no way of actually understanding the amount of people that are coming into this country daily.
Always fluctuate.
And it's always
Increasing.
by hundreds of thousands monthly.
Right.
People in third world countries like Mexico, Central America, and parts of Central America, parts of South America, who are migrating up towards North America at a tremendous rate because of the devastation in their own countries, and I tell them to come. Understanding of why they live in third world conditions. We have a lot of responsibility to take on upon ourselves of the conditions of the hemisphere. We've created a lot of the tension and the understanding of exploitation that is done to the human species on this hemisphere. We've propagated it. It's done by their own, so to speak, but it's governed by the capital that is driven by the United States. So you can't really, you got to say, which came first, the money or the exploitation. And people say, well, the exploitation came first. I don't think so. I think that we were a lot more giving societies 5,000, 10,000 years ago than we are today. We shared more. Granted, we had our boundaries that we wanted to, the Aztecs would go out every so often and they needed, to conquer. And they would go out and they'd conquer, and then the Inca or the Arapaho and the Cheyenne would, go out and try to create a larger sense of balance in the region. But in essence, the country, the planet, but especially this hemisphere, has been one that has been propagated in its growth and its diminishment by the looking for the dollar, the gold.
That's right.
So it started with the conquest even. They were driven by a strong sense of finding wealth.
Right.
So to say that, what can we do with the amount of people that are coming in here, and why do I say for them to come here? It's very basic. They must start to come here because we're not helping their countries develop into first world powers. And because we've set up structures that are inside of their countries that dominate their country. In other words, we've backed 14 to 20 families in Mexico. We've backed regimes in Latin America that have created these wealth pockets that, that's why one of the reasons why 2 of the 5 richest men in the world live in Mexico. They're Mexican citizens. The other 3 don't live here. But 2 of them do live there. Only 1 lives here. The wealthiest men in the world. So it's five riches. So you got to start to balance it out. And I say that we must either bring all the people who really need to live into our country, which we can't do, or we start to help human-wise, humanistically, not NAFTA-ish, but humanistically. Not to exploit, but to really help the human dynamic in those regions. To build,
right.
to really grow. And they say, well, how can you do that? We give them billions of dollars. That is not how you help somebody grow. You don't give them money. You don't give them, a sense of false, hope. No, you give them a sense of understanding that you go and you educate. You take people, you go into the regions, and you help people understand each other. The people that go into the region get more out of it than the people that are receiving this help.
Right.
But the people who are receiving this really kind of mentorship in growth do grow. They grow much quicker than if you gave them $100 and said, okay, there's your money, go do what you want with it.
Right.
That's a whole different thing. What is it saying? You can either take somebody a fish, or you can teach them how to.
Fish. Right.
So what is it that you want to do? We need to get to that level real quick, because this migration has always happened. That's why this country is so large. I mean, there were 26 million people, guesstimation, living in what we now call the U.S. of A. 500 years ago. Then the European migration came about, and soon those 25 million people, or 26 million, were eradicated, and boom, there was 300 million of everybody else. Now there's less than 1 million of the indigenous people within our boundaries, who were here long before anyone else was here, and there are hundreds of millions of people here from all over the world. So let's put into perspective migratory patterns. So why shouldn't another 300 million people migrate here?
Who's to say when does it stop? And
Well,
who comes in?
that is put up by laws and rules and regulations of the country. They're the ones who are saying it. The only thing is that they put rules and regulations on people that they in turn, the people who made the rules and regulations, and their ancestors, the people who were their generations before them, have created a dynamic that does not allow those people in this third world to be able to
Right.
regain their balance and get on
So
foot.
there's almost nowhere to go.
No, they're desperate. These
Right.
people, they don't care.
Right.
So therefore, they're coming here.
Right.
And I care, and I hope other people will care, that we can't sustain this migration. So it's best that we help develop other regions to be as beautiful, as wonderful, as creative, as great as the United States.
All right.
And not leave it for other people to take care of themselves, and us build walls and put some machine guns across the border to
25-foot walls.
hold back the migratory patterns of people, because inevitably we will isolate ourselves to the point of where the whole world will then say, why did you guys create this?
Right.
We will eventually have to, this does not come without its price. We use 85% of all the natural resources, so why shouldn't we give away 85% of our time for others so that they can in turn grow?